public health officials want to avoid another measles outbreak in the Northwest this year, especially since last year most of the cases were kids who hadn't received their MMR shot. And last year was a big year for measles. In fact, it caused the governor to call for a state of emergency. Clark County led the way with 71 measles cases, 52 of which were kids 10 years and younger. Now, across the state, people were exposed to this highly contagious disease just for going grocery shopping or attending school. And that's really what sparked this law change. Before, families could opt out of the MMR shot because of philosophical reasons, but that's no longer the case here. And while there are still medical or religious exemptions, all students have to give their schools either their shot records or their exemption certificates. Yet their teachers, the adults here, do not.
Things like that have been talked about, but we don't have a policy in place, and it doesn't, in the foreseeable future, doesn't look like we're going to have one.
That's coming from Seattle Public Schools, and they're not alone. Every district we called said they don't track teacher vaccinations. One district leader even told me it might be a sticking point in collective bargaining. Often, districts do say they could exclude teachers from campus if there was an outbreak, which is exactly what happened at Issaquah High School last year. That's when it shut down after one of its employees, you guessed it, came down with measles. And this is what they had to say back in May.
I do think that this experience has taught us something, and I would expect that we're going to start a more proactive approach to getting the physical records.
Yet, as school districts learn, they're not changing. When we called Issaquah High School this year, they said they're still not tracking vaccinations in teachers because they said it's not mandated by the state. When I called the state health department, they said there's no incentive for schools to keep track because it's not mandated. And when I called the State Education Association, they said I would need to check with every individual school district to see the local policy regarding teacher vaccinations. That idea is frustrating to some health experts, mostly because they stress herd immunity. That's when a majority of the population is immunized so that others don't have to be. Dr. Elizabeth Mead is the head of Swedish Pediatrics, and she says 95% of the community needs to be immunized, so every shot counts. And if no one's tracking a portion of the community, it could be an issue.
Many vaccine-preventable diseases, measles included, are highly contagious and can be easily passed from person to person. And for that reason, it's my recommendation as a physician that anybody who's in close contact with kids or teenagers or infants be fully vaccinated. So that includes parents, grandparents, daycare workers, healthcare workers, myself included, or teachers.
One important thing to note, in the new law, caregivers at daycares do have to prove immunity. And that's likely because they're working with babies who are too young to have an MMR shot. And most schools do encourage teachers to get vaccinated, but right now there's just no one keeping track, and so far, no push to change that. But if there was, it might be up to our school boards.
It's one thing when your parents are each a different race, but what about when both of your parents are the same race and you're the one who's different? More than 40% of adoptions in the United States are transracial. King 5 anchor Michelle Lee is herself adopted, raised by white parents. She looks at the dangers of ignoring differences in adoptive families.
I was the first person of color most people in my town had ever seen.
Kim Long lives in Shoreline, but that is not where she grew up.
In Solon, Iowa, which is a town of 1,100 people in southeast Iowa, and I grew up on a 200-acre hog farm. So my culture is literally apple pie, weenie roasts, and fish fries.
Apple pie and fish fries in Iowa? Cultural points that have nothing to do with where she was born in Korea. In the early 80s, Kim was adopted by a white family.
I was 2 years old when I was given up, and I think I was like a college love child. And then I was in foster care and at the orphanage in Busan for 6 months, and then I came to the U.S.
Once again, an orphan airlift touches down at Portland, bringing a group of 24 Korean-American war waifs for adoption into American homes.
Because of the Korean War, there are more Korean adoptees like Kim in the U.S. than any other group. An effort started right here in the Pacific Northwest. Yet even after 5 decades, adoptees like her still face discrimination, experiences her family in Iowa didn't share and didn't help her prepare for. When you were growing up, did you ever feel out of place?
All of the time.
Right, like I knew that answer.
And it's still happening. Kim just had her first baby Juniper, and at the very first visit to the pediatrician, a microaggression, a subtle discriminatory act, smacked her in the face. The office staff assumed her name wasn't Kim Long, and they actually changed it to Kim Wong.
Nowhere on our records was there Wong. I'm Kim Long is a German name, actually. It's from my parents. And then they clocked me and changed it only for me to Kimberly Wong.
That racist assumption is the type of encounter her family back in Iowa didn't realize they needed to help her navigate. Back then, adoption agencies told families to raise a child ignoring differences and the cultures they came from.
We didn't have discussions about race. We didn't talk about it. We didn't, say, hey, were there any microaggressions that happened today? It wasn't a thing that we ever talked about, right? It was assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. Pretend like there's no difference.
It's hard to walk around every day and have people see a black woman, but for me not to even feel like a black woman.
A white family in Bellingham adopted Angela Tucker out of foster care.
One of the big points that I have highlighted is you said, me telling them that I'm adopted is not going to help me, and it won't help them understand me either.
She's now a transracial adoption specialist who helps adoptees across the country embrace their unique stories.
It's really dangerous for Black and brown transracial adoptees to not embrace their Blackness and understand what that means in the context of today's world. Okay, Juhi.
She means if you are an adoptee who's been assimilated, ill-prepared for how the outside world may perceive you, it could cost you your life.
I am mentoring a transracially adopted 13-year-old girl who lives in a predominantly white space. And she told me this really interesting story. After George Floyd was murdered, she had gone to hang out with a girlfriend who's a Black friend with Black parents, is not adopted, and that friend's parents was giving her the talk, a lecture about how to act around the police. And my mentee was witnessing that and being like, wow, her parents are really coming down on her hard in a way that was loving still. And then she went back to her house, and her white parents were really hesitant to talk about George Floyd or police brutality. And when they did, she said they talked about it with kind of tears in their eyes and said, I'm so sorry that this is the reality. I'm so sorry that you're gonna have to deal with this. And so this, my mentee was recognizing and said to me, like, I don't know if I'm prepared to be a Black woman in society as I grow up because my parents aren't telling me the same level of the truth of what I saw my Black friend and Black parents tell her. I thought that was really insightful and almost unavoidable, which is why I recommend that white parents of Black kids outsource some of the parenting duties.
So I do think that that is a very interesting point to try to outsource some of the parenting, but then
it's tricky.
It's just tricky, right?
It's tricky because people are like, well, it's like I'm hiring the help. Like, go find a Black person. And for some white adoptive parents, they don't have a community around them that is diverse. So they don't have like a good friend or a neighbor that they can ask to come chat with my kid about this or that. That's also problematic. If you don't have those people in your lives and you really have to seek them out, then that also tells me that your world isn't diverse, which that is not safe for the kids.
You can love your children and still participate in their oppression through the language you use.
Angela's latest project, launched during the pandemic, is her podcast called The Adoptee Next Door. It sheds light on topics like birth reunions and mental health, and now the very hot topic of adoptive parents as white saviors, the idea that white families are heroes for adopting children who are often poor and of color.
Oh, well, you would have been growing up in abject poverty, and here you are, this wonderful life that I'm going to give you, while completely ignoring that they are not going to experience the world the way you do.
But my work, I'm trying so hard to say, who are adoptees outside of what their parents did or thought or didn't do or said. You know,
work being done now in the adoption community tries to honor the lives adoptees actually live, floating between identities and navigating a world that doesn't always see them for who they really are. Kim says she'll make sure her daughter is raised differently, and it starts with talking about race.
I absolutely will do that with Juniper because I think not talking about it was the problem.
Kim Long isn't waiting around for the world to change. She's making sure she's seen for who she really is, even with something as small as a doctor's bill, the one addressed to Kim Wong.
I still haven't paid that bill, by the way. I can't. I'm not a person who doesn't pay bills, and I just can't send him the check. So even now, I mean, it's the microaggressions like that.
It's not just any building off Dexter Avenue. You could say that this one offers a little self-reflection. It's called The Collective, and it's a club that feels so Seattle, yet it has actually never been done before. You call it base camp? What is that? What does that mean for people?
The idea that we're all on our journeys through the city right now. It's a place where you can find fellow travelers, maybe pick up new information that would be useful to you on your next stage. Yeah, so base camp feels right for me.
Who is your target audience?
If you're not intentionally inclusive, you become unintentionally exclusive. And so there's so many preconceived notions that clubs are male, pale, and stale, or that these stodgy environments with like leather-bound books and mahogany walls. We want to shatter all those preconceived notions and just create a space where, as long as people want to be engaged, we want them to be part of the conversation.
And those conversations can be had in two distinct parts of the club, one geared for work and collaboration, the other for rest and a little play.
We're sitting in the hammock garden, and next to us is the campfire circle. Behind us, we have the rock climbing wall, so bouldering, and then an artist-in-residence studio here, and that'll have a different artist each season.
And then what are your favorite spaces?
Climbing wall, yeah. For me, having that opportunity to move, that's really keeps me healthy and happy.
To me, I think the hammock garden we're sitting in, I love.
What do you want people to take away from being a part of this club?
The club should fade into the background and just be a vehicle.
The Collective in someone's mind hopefully is a place where they got to learn something new or meet someone new. Maybe they shared something they haven't shared before, so a place of learning and vulnerability, but really a place where maybe they felt included in a stage of their life where they hadn't felt that before. So a sense of community.
Well, good luck to you guys.
Thank
I think
you.
it's going to be a huge success. I just want to chill out.
Yeah.